Welcome to African American Conservatives, the soul of the conservative movement. I'm your host, Marie Strader. Please do go to anchor.fm/AACONS or brightnews.com or AACONS, AACONS substack.com to subscribe to this podcast and to our commentary. Today is my favorite day out of the month because it's Allen West Week. So, with no further ado, Lieutenant Colonel Allen V. West is a combat veteran of 22 years where he served in uniform. He was a member of the 112th Congress, serving as a representative from Florida. Further, he served as chairman of the Republican Party of Texas and was a gubernatorial candidate for Texas. He is currently the executive director of the American Constitutional Rights Union, the author of 3 books, and is the host of his own podcast, Steadfast and Loyal. Welcome back to the show.
It's good to be with you, Marie, and Happy New Year to you and all the listening audience.
Happy New Year to you, which leads into my first question. Do
Yeah.
you do New Year's resolutions at all? Do you have any this year?
No, the main thing for me is that I continue to try to be a good, strong man as God would have me to be, obedient to his will, and be a good husband, a dad, and a granddad now. And that's about it. But the most important thing for me is to continue to stand up and fight for my country as we see these very interesting times in which we are living.
That is so right. While many are striving to challenge or perhaps torture themselves with New Year's resolutions of their own, you've called for the Republican Party to quote unquote grow a spine. How
Mhm.
has the GOP proven itself to be in need of a spine, and what can they do to obtain one?
Well, I think there are two very prevalent cases of that. It's funny to say last year, but in December of last year, when you saw that omnibus spending package that passed in the United States Senate with 19 Senate Republicans, I mean, that was a great leverage point for the Republicans as they do have the majority in the House getting ready to come in into 2023. So they undermined themselves. And if they had just stood up and force the issue instead of once again allowing the left to back them into a corner and all this talk about government shutdowns, what have you. An omnibus spending bill is really unconstitutional in nature. What the Congress is supposed to do, the only thing they're mandated to do each election, each congressional year, budget year, is to pass a budget. They're supposed to pass 12 appropriations bills. They should be done separately and not thrown together in a big hodgepodge. But of course, they never do what they're supposed to do, and they wait till the last minute and they try to force everyone's hand with all of this fear mongering, and they create this I call it a budget gumbo, where they just throw all kind of stuff in there, and it's not really tasty like a true gumbo is. And so now you see what's going on in the House of Representatives, where because of the concerns that they've seen Kevin McCarthy over the past, I don't know, 12 to 15 years be pretty soft. He's been in leadership that long, and look at the things that have happened over that period. Now they're wondering if he really is the guy that can stand up and be the Speaker of the House, to stand up and push back against the progressive socialist left. I know a lot of people saying that there's a very slim majority, but Nancy Pelosi had a slim majority, and she still was very tenacious and tyrannical. And even though you don't have the Senate under the control of the Republicans, you still have to make the case. You still have to use the power of the purse, which is something that they have with the Democrats, and put with the Republicans have that, and put the Democrats in a position of defense, put them on their heels.
I want to touch on that a little bit, the omnibus bill, because our Senator, John Cornyn, took to social media and after his vote and tweeted, "Sometimes the lesser of two bad choices is all you've got," end quote. Did Republican senators have no choice but to support the omnibus, as Senator Cornyn has claimed?
Well, that comes back to what I said. If you have a spine, you stand up and understand that you do have a choice, and that choice is to say no, that we're not going to go along with this. 1.7 trillion more dollars of spending at a time when we are trying to fight inflation. So you continue to see this administration, and now with the cooperation of those 19 Senate Republicans, continue to push inflation where it is, 7.1%. That's still not a good place for it to be. And then also, increasing our debt and deficit spending. So we're going to have to borrow that money. We're going to have to print that money, which is not good for the economy, not good for inflation. And so, yes, you do have a better choice. And the better choice is to say no to this profligate spending that we continue to see happening, which is, some people are concerned about a decade of economic demise for the United States of America we're looking at. And $30 trillion in debt. I mean, you're in the red line zone. When you think about the debt to GDP ratio, we're in the red line zone. And so it's very disappointing that once again, we have Republicans who are supposed to stand for something. They continue to fall for anything.
You also wrote that this 1.7 trillion omnibus was not just bad policy, but it was unconstitutional as well.
Mhm.
So expand on that, please.
Well, sure. Again, as I stated, what the Congress is supposed to do is pass 12 appropriations bills. You have to understand the budget of the United States of America is broken up in two different parts. On one side, you have the mandatory spending, which no one really touches. That's where Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, net interest of the debt, and that's growing at an exorbitant amount. I mean, I think it's between 63 to 65% of our budget. Then on the other side, you have discretionary spending, and that's where the Congress, really does do the budgetary processes and procedures. But that's broken down into two parts. You have defense discretionary and non-defense discretionary. And you're not supposed to just mix all of this together. You're supposed to pass these 12 appropriations bills. It's all about funding the government. It's supposed to be done by the end of the fiscal year, which is 30 September, and it never gets done. And so what ends up happening is they do this unconstitutional measure. They can do a continuing resolution, which is a 1 month up to 3 month stopgap funding measure, spending measure. But what they end up doing is this thing called an omnibus spending bill, which again, it's unconstitutional. That's not what they're supposed to do. They're mandated by law. What they're supposed to do is pass these 12 appropriations bills. And I think that one of the key things when you talk about the reforms that people are looking for is that they got to get back to passing those 12 bills separate, not, putting a bunch of strap hanging things onto the defense appropriations or what have you, and throwing it all together. We've got to be very clear. We've got to be fiscally responsible. And that's something that people aren't seeing, being a Republican or Democrat. Look, the debt has increased. Remember, we had President Trump there. He had a Republican Senate, had a Republican House, and it continued to grow. The spending continued to grow. So that's what concerns people.
The race for a new House Speaker remains fluid, as you alluded to, as it appears at this moment that Kevin McCarthy is struggling to obtain the 218 votes needed for the position. He has the support of most House Republicans, but those few who oppose him have been unswayable, as we can see from this speech from Florida House Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Well, sometimes we have to do jobs that we don't really want to do. And sometimes we have to do jobs that we are called to do. And so, my colleagues, I rise to nominate the most talented, hardest working member of the Republican Conference, who just gave a speech with more vision than we have ever heard from the alternative. I'm nominating Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan is humble, perhaps today humble to a fault. Maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who wants it so bad. Maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who has sold shares of themselves for more than a decade to get it. Maybe Jim Jordan is the right person for Speaker of the House because he is not beholden to the lobbyists and special interests who have corrupted this place and corrupted this nation under the leadership of both Republicans and Democrats. Maybe Jim Jordan would be the right person for Speaker of the House because he wouldn't fight us when we try to get a term limits bill on the floor. Maybe Jim Jordan would be the right person because he wouldn't fight us when we try to put a balanced budget on the floor and vote for it. And maybe Jim Jordan is the right person because he would endorse the plan that was built by the Texas delegation to finally secure our border. Mr. Jordan said in his nomination that there are certain bills that we have to pass to fix the problem. The challenge is the alternative has been someone voting for the very bills that have caused these problems. Mr. Jordan says that we cannot accept legislation like the Omnibus, and I fully agree. And if Jim Jordan were Speaker of the House, if he were the leader of the Republican team, we wouldn't have that circumstance choking the economy of our country, increasing inflation, and diminishing the prospects of a better life for our fellow Americans. And finally, Mr. Jordan said we must engage in rigorous oversight. Every one of my Republican colleagues knows that the person who can lead that oversight effort, who works on it every day, who has the skill and the talent and the will, is Jim Jordan. I'm nominating him, and I'm voting for him.
Does it portend well for the future of the House GOP that they are already so divided over this matter that the Republicans have resolved with ease some time ago?
Well, the Democrats are going to resolve things with ease because they have a groupthink. They are not independent thinkers. They're kind of like the Borg from the old Star Trek Next Generation. They're a collective body. They don't see themselves as individuals. But without a doubt, what Kevin McCarthy should have been doing is realizing that his history is not that good. And you can't wait till the last minute to say, oh, I've had a road to Damascus moment. I've had a new epiphany. This is what I will seek to do, because people aren't that very trusting. But then on the other hand, you have people that have brought up these cases and these issues. And I think their tactics are a little bit, somewhat goofy, but you have to respect what they're saying and what they're doing. What they're saying is the status quo of Washington, D.C. is broken. People keep saying that. People keep wanting something different. And yet we're trying to do that, but now they're being punished, they're being attacked, they're being assailed. I disagree with these Republicans like Dan Crenshaw. They're calling them enemies, or this Taliban 20 talk, because that's exactly playing into the hands of the Democrats. So at some point in time, they have to unite. Without a doubt, you have 200 members that have voted for Kevin McCarthy. You have 20 that are dissenting. But I think it's important that the people understand why those 20 individuals are dissenting, because there are structural problems wrong in the United States House of Representatives. And if we don't stand strong, if they don't get these reforms in place, we're going to have problems going on. But at some point in time, you have to say this is as good as it's going to get. And maybe you go ahead and you vote for Kevin McCarthy, but you hold his feet to the fire, especially when you've now got the motion to vacate, which is something Nancy Pelosi would not agree to. With the motion to vacate, then they can once again hold presumably Speaker McCarthy's feet to the fire.
Some believe that Representative McCarthy, despite his troubles, will be the next speaker, although it now looks like he may lose to conservative favorite Jim Jordan, despite the fact that Jim Jordan has endorsed him. There also is the possibility that Democrats will find a bag of misplaced ballots somewhere that will turn the election in favor of Nancy Pelosi. Should Kevin McCarthy drop out of contention and endorse Representative Jordan, or should he soldier on?
Well, Kevin McCarthy has already said that he is not going to withdraw his name. There's a bit of arrogance or ego there. You have to understand the reality before you. He's lost 3 ballots, and of course, they'll be starting on ballot number 4, and we'll see what happens after that. If you go a second day without winning any of these ballots, then you got to go back to the drawing board. And I think it's so important that the 20 dissenters have to come up with someone that is viable. Jim Jordan has already said he does not want the position. He wants to focus on being the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, which is admirable. But if Kevin McCarthy does not step down, that means no one else is really going to stand up and look to take his place. Now, there is concern that much the same as what we see here in the state of Texas, is that Kevin McCarthy may go and try to woo some quote unquote moderate Democrats to give him support, because Hakeem Jeffries right now is right there solid at 212. But I don't think that would bode well for McCarthy if all of a sudden he goes and courts Democrats to be able to get himself to the speaker's position, because that means that he will be being owing them. And what will happen as far as the priorities there for the Republicans. So I think right now it's very important for us to see what happens in ballot number 4, maybe 5, definitely this second day. But at some point in time, we don't want to go like they did in 1923, I believe, with 9 days, because it just becomes a really bad version of kabuki theater. And it plays into the hands, the narrative of the progressive socialist left and their media accomplices that says, look, the Republicans, they can't lead, they can't govern, they can't figure this thing out. And so there needs to be better messaging on the Republican side as well.
If you were still in the House, who would you vote for?
Maybe if I was still in the House, I'd be running for Speaker. I don't know, but I know Kevin McCarthy. I've had some troubles and issues with him. And look, the Republicans up there, they didn't want me. I mean, I stood up and voted on principles, voted on what I felt that the people back in my district wanted me to vote on, and I got redistricted out by Republicans. So I understand the games that they play when you don't want to go along and get along with them, because my oath is to the Constitution, it's not to a party, it's not to a person. And that's how I would articulate things up there. So I think I'd be very challenged, to go out and vote and support Kevin McCarthy. But at some point in time, I would understand that unity is very important. I don't want to see the snickering and all the jabs coming from the Democrats, but I know how to hold people's feet to the fire. And I think that Kevin and I would have had a very interesting conversation before he officially made his bid to be Speaker. I don't believe that anybody's entitled to a leadership position. You have to earn a leadership position. And unfortunately, that's what I think we see happening right now in the House GOP, a sense of entitlement instead of a sense of service.
On your new blog at alanwest.substack.com, you announced that you'll be returning to Washington, D.C. in February to speak before the House Second Amendment Caucus. What are some of the things that we can expect you to say?
Well, I think without a doubt, now that we have the GOP in control of the House, we have got to get the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms back into a constitutional box. We cannot continue to allow them to come up with these rules and regulations that undermine our Second Amendment rights. Recently we had Michael Cargill on our Steadfast Law podcast. He is the owner of the Central Texas Gun Works down in Austin, Texas. He's brought a lawsuit against the Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, ATF, because what they're doing now is they are revoking the licenses of these federal firearms licensees over clerical errors on a 4478 background check form. They are violating their own Gun Control Act of 1968 by making up these rules and not following along with the law, trying to say that a clerical error is an intentional design to undermine a background check. This is horrible. And so what we see happening is that the left, instead of going after just saying we want to take away your guns, which they really want to do, they're trying to undermine all the means by which legal law-abiding gun owners in America can have firearms. So I think it's so important. We talked to the House Second Amendment Caucus, and they have to use that power of the purse. They have to have the hearings, bring the ATF up. They just created a new ATF Form 4473 in December. Guess what? Not a lot of people are paying attention to that. They didn't put it out for comment. And it's kind of a setup where all of a sudden people can be out there still using the old 4473 form, and someone can come in from the ATF and say, look, I'm revoking your license because you're not using the new form that we just put out last week, which is hard to access online. So it's those type of things that we need to make sure that we get back under control, because we are seeing our constitutional rights, and especially the Second Amendment rights, being undermined because of the ideology of the left. They want to disarm legal law-abiding American citizens. They want to have these open borders. They want to release violent criminals back out onto the streets, and they want to defund the police officers. They are creating the true chaos and confusion on our streets.
One area of investigation the House Republicans might explore, should they continue the J6 committee, is the role of Representative Pelosi ahead of the riot. which a GOP report claims she was negligent despite warnings that violence might occur later that day. Why, in your opinion, would Ms. Pelosi not accept the thousands of National Guards that could have prevented the breach?
It's very simple. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And what they saw was an opportunity to capitalize on this. And look at what they did. They absolutely capitalized on it in every way, shape, form, and fashion. If you're going to have, hundreds of thousands of people show up to Washington, D.C., first and foremost, you got to have some control mechanisms in place to make sure things don't get out of hand. But then you look at the left, and I think that they were really trying to stoke those fires and allow things to get out of hand because they knew that would help them as far as a media narrative in the long run. But I think that we should just end this whole January 6th fiasco. No more committee and no more hearings about it. But let's get to the things that the American people are really concerned about: their economic security, their energy security, national security, the border security, their domestic security. We just talked about the rise of crime, and then also education freedom and parental rights. Those are the things. And we need to make sure that there's accountability, that there are consequences to unconstitutional actions that are going on in Washington, D.C. We need to hold the Alexander Mayorkas of the Homeland Security accountable. We need to hold Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, accountable. Merrick Garland, the head of the DOJ, accountable. And we need to get to the bottom line of whether or not we have a president that has been fully compromised by way of the dealings of his son, which I think is pretty much so well known.
Last time you were here, the Twitter files were just being released. You've called the FBI a, quote, corrupt organization and an institution that is part of the Department of Justice that is no longer seeking out to do justice, but seeking out to do the will of an ideological arm, the progressive socialist left, end quote. Why do you believe this, and what can be done to reform it?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you got to do something about the senior leadership of the FBI. I mean, look at Andrew McCabe. Look at Peter Strzok and Peter Strzok's girlfriend. I forget her name, Lisa, whatever. But look at
Lisa Page.
Lisa Page. Look at what they did. But yet there's no consequences for it. And now thanks to the Twitter files, that the FBI was out there colluding and actually using taxpayer money to get a private sector organization, Twitter, to undermine the Second Amendment rights of First Amendment rights of the American people, their freedom of speech, their freedom of expression. So who would have ever thought we'd get to a point where a government agency was undermining our constitutional rights? Not to mention, on top of that, they're going out there paying more attention to arresting and investigating pro-life organizations than the organizations like Jane's Revenge that are burning down and committing arson against pro-life organizations. So this is a completely ideological, a completely compromised FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nothing's going to change, I don't think, in this Biden administration. But one of the things that the 20 dissenters have brought up is that there's a means by which compensation and pay can be withheld from these federal agency members and employees that are out there doing these unconstitutional things. So those are the type of things that we can start doing, holding the leadership accountable, holding the agencies accountable, and turning off the spigot instead of, 87,000 new IRS agents and all of these different things. So that's where we've got to start being smart and using the power of that purse.
You've been a guest on Tim Pool's Timcast IRL. He recently deconstructed the Georgia Senate race, and you concurred with most of his assessment, which led to a conversation that you and I had that I'd like to reconstruct for our audience. Team Walker failed to point out Herschel's success as a businessman and his many contributions to the Black community. They failed even to make a concerted effort to secure the Black vote. We discussed the avoidance of many conservatives to discuss the issue of race at all. However, we know that illegal immigration hurts Blacks and minorities the most. We know that abortion was intended to decimate the Black community, and it has, with over 20 million Black babies aborted over the United States population the year that you were born, the Black population that you were born in 1961. With so many issues affecting the Black community, why is everything labeled identity politics? And how can we articulate these issues without having that label applied?
Well, it's not about identity politics. Identity politics is when you try to elevate someone based upon their skin color, whatever, but addressing the issues that the progressive socialist left, aka the Democrat Party, have brought upon the Black community to its detriment. That's not identity politics. And I think that you take someone like Herschel Walker, and you got to understand the battleground that you're in. 5 metropolitan areas that really determine the politics in Atlanta and in Georgia. That's the Atlanta metropolitan area, Augusta, and Herschel was brought up not too far away from Augusta in Wrightsville, Georgia, Columbus, Savannah, and Macon. And to not have him go and be in those urban population centers and connect with the Black community and tell this story, to me, that's reprehensible. It's unconscionable to do that. You cannot cede ground and territory over to the left, because then you just look like you don't care and you don't want to engage. We got to engage everywhere, every community, and look at the success that we had here in the state of Texas, where, as chairman, I just showed up down in the Rio Grande Valley. They had never seen a chairman of the Republican Party of Texas down there before. And not just one time, but multiple occasions. We even had a quarterly SREC meeting in Laredo, Texas, right there on the border. And there are many members of the state Republican Executive Committee here in Texas who had never been to the border. And so those are the type of things that we have to do. We got to go on offense. We got to go behind the enemy lines. We got to cause the disruption and stop worrying about winning everyone over. But if you can win, that 10 to 15%, you're going to make a difference. And you had all the issues on your side, as you just articulated some of them. We need to talk about the fatherlessness issue. We need to talk about the economic lack of economic growth issue. We need to talk about the education freedom issue. Ron DeSantis won 4 years ago in Florida because he supported school choice. And he said to single Black mothers he would not relegate their kids to failing public schools. And guess what? He came back and he passed a school choice legislation. So why did they not have Herschel Walker talking about that as along with the business aspect as well?
Those are absolutely cogent points, by the way. I mean, it astounds me that we don't talk about these issues more. So, what is your take on the George Santos controversy?
Well, I think there's a verse in the Bible where it talks about do not worry about the speck in your brother's eye when you have a plank in your own. And so to go after this guy and call him a liar and all these things, Joe Biden is the father of liars. Joe Biden and his plagiarism and all of this. And I remember when Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, sat down and said that he was a veteran from Vietnam. Come to find out he'd never been to Vietnam, but yeah, he's still a U.S. senator, and nothing, came out of that. And so all of the, hypocrisy of the left is so duplicitous, it's so laughable. But, George Santos has some problems. He has some issues, fabricated some things. But I think the Democrats are mad because guess what? They're the only ones that should be able to go out and fabricate stuff and make stuff up. And they don't like the fact that he was successful in doing that. So it's almost as if he took a page out of their playbook and used it against them. Now, do I believe that you should, fabricate your resume? No, you should stand on truth. You should be a forthcoming person. But to have the Democrats, going after him, that's really the pot calling the kettle black. That's what we say down south.
Now, the University of Pennsylvania, in a report, has suggested that the Marines forbid recruits from addressing superior officers as sir and ma'am in order to avoid misgendering and offending them. What's your reaction?
That's just stupid. I don't know what else to say. I mean, this is, part of who we are, the part of the discipline and the respect that we have in the military. To this day, I mean, I call everyone sir or ma'am if I don't know you, and I'm not comfortable with calling you by your first name. That's a modicum of respect. And you got the Air Force Academy out there telling their cadets that they should not refer to people as mom and dad. I mean, where have we gotten with our military? And I just pray the Marine Corps looks at this and says, "You got to be kidding me. We're not going to accept any of this foolishness." And there's a lot of back channel conversation in military websites and email threads that we're getting out of hand. And this is why you have recruiting and you have retention that's at all time levels, because all this woke mess that is going on in our United States military. Yet you have a Secretary of the Army that comes out and says there's no wokeness in the military, while they sit around and they're worried about pronouns and they're worried about gender dysphoria and all these other things, instead of worrying about our capability and capacity and how we rectify the problems and the situations with our recruitment.
And military life is a culture, right? I mean,
Yes.
and that's what you see here in Texas. I mean, when we moved here to Texas, everything was yes sir and yes ma'am and no sir and no ma'am. I mean, that's cultural. That's
Hmm.
instilled in Texans as a value. I mean, that's inculcated. And my kids picked up on that right away. I mean, because in
Hmm.
California it's yeah and that kind of thing, but here it's yes sir, yes ma'am.
Hmm.
And so that just seems to me that that's a no-brainer. So,
It is a no-brainer, but really what you see happening, Marie, is that the left is trying to tear down everything that is a fundamental truth in our society. There is male, female, man, woman, husband, wife, whatever you want to call it. That's just how it is. And really, it's an attack on God, saying that he was too stupid to get it right. There was no Adam and Eve. It could be Adam could have chosen to be Eve, and Eve could have chosen to be Adam, based upon these people and their thought processes today. But to disregard, I mean, we have birthing persons now. We don't have mothers. Or even the case of out in El Paso, Texas, where a teacher was fired because she said they're no longer pedophiles; they're minor attracted persons. We got to be very careful about how they're redefining the language in our culture and breaking down our societal norms, because this leads to puts us on the road to perdition.
that's absolutely right. In 2011, you wrote, quote, "In Israel, I will get the opportunity to meet a true leader, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, at a time when Western civilization has no leading voice. I believe the only one that resonates speaks Hebrew." End quote. Do you feel this way today now that Prime Minister Netanyahu is prime minister once again?
Well, somebody's got to step up to the plate and be a leader. We don't have a leader in the United States of America. Mitch McConnell's not a leader in America. Kevin McCarthy is struggling. Ronna McDaniel may not even get her RNC chair. Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, these aren't leaders. Joe Biden, who in the middle of a winter storm decides he's going to go to St. Croix and have a nice vacation at a private villa provided to him by a donor. What's the ethics investigation on that? Kamala Harris is not a leader. So, yeah, I mean, the only person that I see that has been consistently out there standing up for what is true and what is right and protecting his people in a very dangerous neighborhood has been Benjamin Netanyahu. But I would have never thought I see America as it is today as a rudderless ship and no one's at the helm.
Well, that's until you run for president.
Oh, stop it.
So, Alan, if you're just joining us, our guest this segment has been Colonel Alan West. Alan, how can our audience continue to follow you and find you online?
Well, I'm out there on all those social media platforms except TikTok because I'm not having anything to do with the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that we need to ban TikTok in this country. Also out there on Substack, you can follow the Steadfast and Loyal podcast, Spotify, YouTube. Just Google Steadfast and Loyal, it'll pop up. And it's just a pleasure and honor to be able to share thoughts, perspectives, and insights. And again, Marie, thank you so very much for resurrecting African American conservatives. This is a very key platform, and we have got to get the truth out there.
As always, I appreciate you so much. Love you.
Thank you. God bless. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So now is the point in our show where we bring in DK. DK, come on in.
Hola.
Hey, I'm sorry. I've been really, really sick, and I think it showed today.
No.
So I wasn't as sparkly as I normally am and bubbly because I'm struggling with my voice. But so I'm going to let you carry most of the conversation
Oh my God.
afterwards. Yeah,
That's never
yeah.
happened.
No, not if you watch us on Tuesdays and Thursday nights on Facebook. That was a plug, by the way. Yeah, no. So what did you think?
I thought he was great on every point as always. Very smart, very articulate man, great values, great center. I disagree with one minor point that he made, that he wanted to see the January 6th commission disbanded, move on to other things. I think I support all the things he mentioned, the investigations into Hunter Biden and the whole list of things, but I think the January 6th commission should continue under Republican leadership, because I don't feel we got much of the truth from the January 6th commission. I think we got a lot of distortions and dishonesties, and I think they should be swatted away with the truth as quickly as possible. In fact, I read today that there are videos and facts that they want to file away for at least 50 years, which is outrageous. I mean, we allowed the Democrats to tear the country apart over January 6th. It became a MAGA issue immediately. We don't know what happened that day. We don't know the full extent of the FBI involvement in the riot. Some say there's evidence that the FBI was inside the Capitol building in full riot gear, not riot gear as in the police, riot gear as in people who be rioting. They were inside the Capitol building even before the first breach occurred. I can't swear that that's true, but I did hear it from a reliable source. So I would love to see the January 6th commission continue. I think there's a lot of things we need to know. I think we've been lied to on a number of points. I just did a blog that's also on our Substack page that I raised concerns about what we're being told about Ray Epps and what we're being told about Nancy Pelosi's involvement prior to that day. And I just want the truth to get out there.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Anything else you want to bring up today?
Yeah, there was a very sad story this week. I think almost everybody in the country has known about it already. The Damar Hamlin case. He's this 24-year-old guy, very fit, professional athlete. In the middle of not even the middle, the very first quarter of a football game on Monday Night Football, he goes into cardiac arrest. So as long as delay in the game, they had to give him electric shocks, CPR. He's still in critical condition. It was quite a tragic thing to witness, I thought. And I think it's very sad that immediately afterwards that the Damar Hamlin situation became yet another debate over the COVID vaccine. And I just wanted to bring up some points that may be relevant. I'm not going to argue either way. Some people made a choice not to get vaccinated. I made a choice to get vaccinated. I got all the shots. I decided not to get another shot because apparently the vaccine doesn't do anything against the new variant, the XBB variant that's coming from China. But I did get all the shots before the recent variant. I walk around everywhere with my KN95 mask. If you see me in public, I'll be wearing this. I got into an argument on social media, believe it or not, with some guy who called me a fool because I'm so cautious about the COVID vaccine, the Kung flu, as I used to call it. And I remember his point was that I was foolish to get vaxxed. I was foolish to wear a mask, and I should take advice from him because he had caught COVID 3 times. I don't know why somebody who had COVID 3 times would want to give me advice. to mock my prevention of COVID, but that's where we were. And I wanted to bring up some points that I think that should be brought up. There are a lot of people out there. I saw this on social media who are arguing that the COVID vax is leading to an epidemic of right after the Damar Hamlin case, the sad tragedy of his cardiac arrest. You saw on social media trending sudden death. Apparently, there's an argument that people who got vaxxed are vulnerable and are dying from heart issues, cardiac arrest issues, and it's happening with a number of people who are otherwise young and fit, and that's coming from not stupid people. That's been argued by some people I admire a lot. Eric July, for example, he had a video after ABC producer who was, I think, 37 years old, who looked like a fit guy, no issues of heart problems. He had a sudden death of cardiac arrest, and it was brought up that he was also vaxxed. And there was other stories of young, fit individuals who were suffering from heart problems suddenly after being vaxxed. And I don't know if that's true or not. And I'm not saying it isn't. I'm not saying that it is. I don't know to what degree that is true. I mean, I just looked at some numbers to keep it in perspective. To assume, let's make an assumption that since COVID became available, I don't know the number again, but let's just say that 1,000 people have died from post-COVID vax cardiac arrest. People who are young and would not have had heart problems if they were not vaccinated. Let's say there's been 1,000 cases. There have been 235 million Americans who are fully vaxxed. I think that's roughly 65% of the country. So even if 1,000 of those people died from heart issues, which is a huge number, it's probably closer to 100. And even one death, of course, is a tragic situation. But even if 1,000 died from cardiac arrest post-vax, that would only be 0.00004% of people who've been vaxxed who suffered from these heart issues. That's not a number you're going to hear on like Tucker Carlson or these other outlets who are so adamantly against the vax, and people like me who wear what they call what did they call it?
Face diapers.
Face diapers. I was going to say obedience masks. That's what they call it. Because apparently I'm a sheep for trying to protect myself and my family from this disease. So I just want to underscore that number. Even if it's 1,000 people who suffer post-vax cardiac issue, that's still only 0.00004% of the people who are vaxxed. And as a comparison, before the vax, which is around January of 2021, there were reportedly 4,000 people a day dying from COVID issues. So,
Well,
okay.
I think there are a couple of things. One, COVID. First of all, I want to say that I am praying for Damar Hamlin. That has hit me very hard because I have a son who is 24 years old. So I can't imagine what that must be like. And I'm praying for Damar. I'm praying for his mother. We saw him go to the sidelines before the game and give her a big hug. So that definitely resonated with me as a mom of someone who is that age. But to your point, COVID is a relatively, this particular manufactured, if you will, virus in 2020 was brand new. And so I think that's why you see so many people dying from it. When you have a new illness that no one is immune to or is built up any immunity to, you're going to see that more than you are going to see it with other illnesses that, occur year after year, like the flu. A lot of people die with the flu because it's a little different every year, a little bit of a different strain. But the flu is nothing new. It's been around forever. So, people adapt to it. I mean, I think God created us with an adaptogen, an ability to adapt. But to your point about the numbers, I read something today that said that the effects of the vaccine have, and I'm not a medical person, so don't quote me on this. I'm probably explaining it badly, but this is in a layman's terms, that people who have been vaccinated pass on that new genetic structure to subsequent children that they have. So this is going to be something that is going to be hardwired into future human beings. So maybe I don't die of myocarditis. Maybe I don't have heart conditions, but perhaps a child that I carry in the future, that's a train's left the station. So maybe not that I carry, but if I were of childbearing age and I were to carry a child and I had been vaccinated, perhaps I would pass on that genetic predisposition to heart issues to that child. So you're right. This is a very complex debate. You and I have very different situations. I chose not to vaccinate. I am a selective vaxxer. I've always been a selective vaxxer. I do believe in a lot of homeopathic remedies. We do a lot of aromatherapy. I do have a cold and a flu right now, or some kind of something that's been going around. But I believe it builds up the immunity, but I get sick very, very rarely. I think this is maybe the second time in about 5-6 years that I've been sick. So I don't get sick very often. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we do a lot of homeopathic stuff. That said, I live with my husband, who just turned 60 this year, and my 3 children who are 20, just turned 20, 21, and 24, all in relatively good health. They do have a few medical challenges, but relatively good health. You are in a different situation. You are a caregiver to someone who is elderly and is in the risk category for coronavirus. And I believe that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, was the motivation for much of what you did preventatively, was for her benefit. So, I mean, I think that our situations are very different. And so each person has to evaluate their own health situation. They have to evaluate who they might be caring for and what that population is like. They have to take into consideration, am I in my childbearing years? If I vaccinate, will I, perhaps pass on any traits to my future progeny? So, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to think about, but the bottom line is, in all of this, besides making that determination for yourself with the available information that you have on hand, is that this country, much like 9/12, came together. We had sports rivals come together, Bills fans, Bengals fans, everybody praying on that field for Damar Hamlin. The whole country prayed for Damar Hamlin. He was trying to raise $2,500 for his charity that it's a toy drive for children around the holidays. He was trying to get $2,500, and at last estimate that I saw, it was over $3 million. So I think the bottom line is we continue to pray for Damar Hamlin. I've heard that his oxygen was at 100% on his ventilator. It's now been reduced to 50%, even though he is still on the ventilator. But there's still a lot of praying that we need to do for Damar Hamlin. And I pray that he experiences a full recovery.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, of course. It's so shocking and sad to see a young man in the prime of his physical life in his physical prime to suffer a cardiac arrest, and it doesn't.
And it is an anomaly. I mean, it is definitely an anomaly. We
Yeah,
don't
no, I
know
just
why.
wanted to emphasize that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to make sure, and at least in my view, that those of us who are fully vaxxed not go into panic mode because of this. The dangers associated with the vax seem to be minute. I don't know anything about the story you just referenced, but the people who have an adverse reaction to the vax are a minute percentage of 1%. It's not a issue on a national scale, I'll say. And even if you choose not to get vaxxed, I think these are so important. I think these help prevent COVID and the flu and other illnesses much more than the
Doesn't
vax.
prevent it. It lessens the.
It helps prevent it helps prevent catching COVID, the flu, colds, and any other of these viruses. I do believe it does.
I believe it lessens the severity, but also I believe that vaccines usually have a much longer period where they study the effects, and because we had a global pandemic, something was pushed through very quickly, and maybe it did save more lives, but it has also cost some lives. And so I do believe that there need to be more longitudinal studies. And just because we haven't seen the effects of it right now doesn't mean that there may not be some in the future. For example, we're seeing, like, with all the Camp Lejeune ads, or the asbestos ads, or what is it, mesothelioma ads, and those kinds of things. It could be years and years and years from now that we find out that it had a cancer causing agent or something like that takes years to manifest. We just don't know. And so that's the thing about medicine. You go with what you know, and you make the best informed decisions. I will say that there were a lot of things. You and I have talked about Dr. Fauci and some of the claims that he's made. I believe in fully informing people to the best of your ability and being absolutely as transparent as possible so that people can make their own informed choices based upon their own realities. And I don't think that people had that information from Dr. Fauci for sure. And so, what do? I don't think we can armchair quarterback this. I do think, very much like political ideology, people who believe or lean to one side of the spectrum should not be calling names to the other side of the spectrum. I think that's one of the reasons why our show perhaps isn't as wildly popular as maybe other ones are, where people are called demon rats and libtards and all of that kind of very disrespectful language. I don't think that elevates a conversation at all. And so we tend to be very nuanced in our conversations about things like this conversation. I'm not a straight out anti-vaxxer, but I'm selective for sure. And I look at the risks and I look at the benefits and I look at, a lot of studies, just like you do. Your situation is very different from my situation. And so what's right for you may not be right for me, and vice versa. So I think that, like political affiliation, or whatever things, that could divide people, we need to stop the stigma and shame. We talked a few weeks ago, about mental health stigma, that if somebody needs medication or somebody needs help, they should get medication, they should get help. So if somebody has chosen to vaccinate, we don't know what their situation is. We don't. So I can't judge them or talk about them or say things about them. But by the same token, I don't think they should say anything about me if I've chosen not to. If I have a healthy immune system, you don't know what I take or what supplements I take or what I do in my home that help me prevent getting this illness. So, I've had it once. I believe that I've got a pretty decent immune system to it. But I don't know. There are variants that are going to be introduced into our society now, for perpetuality, in perpetuity. So, I don't know. It's a very complex, very nuanced conversation that people can hold with their families and with their care providers and with God.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Dr. Fauci, yeah, a lot of things that he did was inexcusable in my view. He discouraged mask wearing. He overplayed the efficacy of those thin blue masks that were so available a few years ago. Instead of telling people that they need at least an N95 or KN95 mask to help prevent catching the COVID thing, it became controversial to even mention alternatives to the vaccine, like hydrochloroquine and other methods that legitimate people, we're talking about Ivy League medical professors, they recommend it and they were demonized for it. And that's the bottom line. I just want to encourage people, especially with the XBB virus, the variant coming over from China, and we see news clips from China um, how those hospitals are being overloaded with elderly people, and it was very reminiscent of what we saw in this country not too long ago. So I'm just going to wrap up with that. I'm just going to encourage people to not panic if you have the vaccine. The vaccine may not be much good now in 2022, but I think it was a good thing for me to take it. I'm sorry more people didn't get vaxxed, and more than anything, I want to encourage people to wear your mask. I think it does much more. I think it does a lot of good, as ridiculous as some people try to make you feel. So, that's my wrap up.
My wrap up is that I selectively mask. I have OCD, so mine is more germophobia than anything else. But I do believe that we are a free people. We like our liberty. And so I lived in California. Oh, I lived in California under the Newsom regime where everything was locked down and it was insane while he went to French press laundry and had his $350 lunches.
Yeah,
Do
that
as I
didn't
say,
help.
not as I do. No, no, not at all. And so I saw churches being closed down. The congregation that I attended it was really difficult to not worship in person. And I think that was difficult for a lot of people of faith. And
And the
I moved
school
to Texas.
lockdowns too.
Yeah, and the school lockdowns. Having moved to Texas during the pandemic and come here, it was almost like the Babylon Bee couple, coming from California to Texas, where, they've got their masks and they've got all these, things that they do from back in California that
Coming to Texas from California.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Coming to
Mhm.
Texas from California, it was kind of like, we can take our masks off. Huh? What? We walked into the church building and hardly anybody's wearing masks. Like, what? So, I think it comes down to essential liberty. And the beauty of the fact that you and I differ on this is that we have the freedom to make those choices for our own families. And with that, this is another episode of African American Conservatives, the soul of the conservative movement. I'm Marie saying goodbye.
I'm DK. I'm masking myself. I
This
still
is
look
Marie
good, by the
rolling
way.
her eyes at you.
I still look very good.
Well, okay, fair enough. Until next time, we'll see you on the other side. Be sure to go to brightnews.com, go to anchor.fm/AACONS or AACONS.substack.com. And we'll see you next time.